Your fear of being alone is keeping you in toxic relationships. It's keeping you in relationships that are preventing your growth. But often you are used to that. Your survival skill says, you know what? This is an okay relationship. I don't want to be alone. Let's chat about it. Check it out. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Positivity Experience. It is your girl, Lori, and woo, have I had a roller coaster since I have chatted with y'all. I have cats that are now fighting and hate each other. I had a flooding basement. And so this past week's podcast that you got was already pre-recorded, and that was a reminder as to why I need to be at least one ahead. So so my nervous system is resetting. It is something that I know about me. I can, when it's survival, I can do it without a problem. So it's the after effect that allows me to kind of reset. And I was so happy to do this today because I am coming out of that reset mode. But I wanted to share it with you before we jump into about relationships. But technically it is the same relationship, talking about the relationship with yourself. It's just so interesting. So many things popped up. A little imposter syndrome came, a little bit of overwhelm came. What do I want to do? Who do I want to be? Oh my God, where should I take this? Why is my book not finished? Yeah, boy, did that bring a lot of things to surface that I'm still realizing. Thank God I have these tools. I still work on them, but always remember, tools are not a fast fix. Tools are a reminder of when you are in those darker spots, because God knows you will have them. I think a lot of people think that, listen to podcasts, listen to book, listen to speakers. It doesn't matter. We are going to have tools for you. And again, there's only so many ways to get to a balanced space. So you're going to hear it a million different ways from a million different people. But it is a reminder that you need the tools in those times that are not so positive. So you want to be careful of chasing this fast fix. So over on Patreon, which I'm really excited about, not only are you going to get a worksheet for this week's podcast, because you do all the time on Patreon, there is also a bonus episode for the people who are in the higher tier. And this month's bonus episode are 5 green flags and 5 red flags in relationships. So it pairs very nicely to this. If you are a person like myself who can listen and it all sounds good, but overwhelming, I prefer a worksheet for myself. So I take the time to make a worksheet for you guys, but that is over on the Patreon. Should that be your jam, it's patreon.com/the positivity experience, or you can click the show notes. That is the description here, and you can always find the link. And do not forget, and this is going to come into very handy for you, the free workbook on letting go is also on the website. And that's going to be helpful. I'm also building a second part to that where it's just going to be a few bucks to kind of capitalize on that as well. I'm also going to be sending out a newsletter. If you want to get on that email list, you can do all of that on the website. So there is all the business out of the way. So let's chat about relationships. And I have so many things to tell you about my personal situations with toxic relationships. And like I was saying in the beginning, it sounds really funny, but sometimes you're having the toxic relationship with yourself. It's not so much that it's toxic, but there's a version of you that wants to be the person that you're used to being. So in my case, it's in survival, which I realized a lot when my whole world got chaotic, and I'm still dealing with trying to repair the flooded basement and new systems with cats, and they don't like each other, and it's a whole thing. And I realize a lot of that goes into survival. So very often you don't want to leave the version of you because you'd rather not know what it's like being alone and improving yourself versus not being alone and being with the version of yourself that you're used to. So believe it or not, even though we're talking about relationships and not wanting to be alone, so you stay in those relationships, in all honesty, that's also a big piece of you, right? We get accompanied, or we accompany ourselves on the version in which we know. So we're going to have to be okay with distancing that too. And you're just going to have to go down that road if that's what you're seeking to heal. So it's the fear of being alone. It's keeping you in wrong relationships. And first off, before I even get into the psychology of it and the attachment of it all, you have to remember that you don't want to have people in your life for the sake of having people, right? I promise you, you would rather be alone. And quite honestly, you need to be alone for a while, sometimes a long while. To get back to calibrate within yourself. You have to do that. I guess you don't have to do it, but if you want to grow, that's what you want to do. And very often you'd rather keep the chaos this goes into attachment, by the way, and codependency. You would rather keep the chaos for the sake of having the chaos and knowing the familiar. And that goes into survival. That goes into a whole crap ton of stuff that we're going to talk about we have talked, and we're going to talk even more about especially given the situations that happened this past week. I'm like, ooh, I want to cover certain topics. So those will be coming in the upcoming time. So you're staying in wrong relationships, and that can not only do damage to your mental health, it can do damage to your physical health. It can exhaust you out. It can create high cortisol levels, and it can lead to emotional exhaustion and absolute loss of identity and long-term dissatisfaction. So let's unbox each one of those things. So anytime that you stay in an emotional exhaustion space, this goes back, if you go back and listen to the podcast just a few weeks ago on emotional labor, this is kind of leading right into that. And emotional exhaustion is A, changing yourself. B, not wanting that person to go. So you're walking on eggshells. Then, what can I do different? So you're doing all of these things that are going to cause you this horrible exhaustion, and you're just going to feel dissatisfied. So that's your long-term dissatisfaction, because you're sacrificing who you are. And by the way, you might not even know who the hell that is. You might not know who the hell that is. So sometimes staying in these relationships, it's like, cool, I don't have to work on myself. Believe it or not, that's a real thing. That is a real thing, because when you're not in these toxic relationships or wrong relationships, you're forced to sit with yourself. You're forced to have a come to your session meeting that says, what do I want? And I can promise you 85 to 90% of the times you don't know. You'll say things like peace, love, happiness. Yeah. Cool. Love that for all of us. But that's not what your goal to go forward is. And sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, you are avoiding yourself. By avoiding yourself, you're staying in these wrong relationships, and you're definitely going to lose identity. Hell, you might not even know who you are right now. So of course, if you're in a relationship that's wrong for you and you're trying to make it work, of course you don't know who the hell you are. You're letting them tell you. So a lot of this is psychological, and it's evolutionary, and it roots to being alone in general. So think about, I guess you can't think about it because you weren't in caveman days, but let's go back to caveman days. Very often you had to be alone to go out into the world, but you also needed the connection at home. We are not an island of one, but sometimes you have to be an island of one in order to let the tourists come, let's grow this island. You have to be that way. So if you go back to the evolution of humans, we've always needed support along the way. Now, that doesn't mean you grapple onto anything and just hope that this person is going to support you. No. Back in a million years, I wasn't there. I'm only going by how psychology works and the brain. And of course, we only know what we know here, right? We only know based on all of that, but we don't really know what people experienced back then. But if you can think about the survival and having that person or persons at home to balance you is a good balance versus I'm going to go out and kill a saber-toothed tiger and here's our dinner. Okay. I just want you to realize it's not abnormal to want to be with people. It's not abnormal to have that for your survival in life, right? It can't be your codependency. But the problem isn't that. The issue is that you're not willing to see past a wrong relationship. And half the time, you don't even know if the damn thing's wrong. And that's what those red flag, green flags are that we'll talk about later on Patreon. But that's the biggest thing for you. Yes, relationships are good. No, they are not good for the sake of having them. And of course, attachments. So let's go into that. Why are you staying in these, why are you staying in these relationships? Well, there's attachments. You guys know I specialize in attachments. I have a whole podcast on attachments. And there's 4 attachment styles. And the one you're going for is secure attachment. But you have your anxious attachment, which is obvious. You have your avoidant attachment, which is obvious. You have your disorganized, which is obvious. So that means you have a little bit of anxious and a little bit of, avoidant. And you're like, ooh, this is a good marriage. It's not. It's not. So you're going for secure attachment. It's going to take you some minute to get there. Some time to get there based on things that you're still working through. Okay. But if you have a fear of abandonment, which we understand is trauma, but remember you're here today. We can't keep surfing on why we're here. You got to know why, but we can't live there. You want to focus now on what your fear of abandonment is, right? And that's wired into us in infancy. because guess what? We can't feed ourselves. We can't clothe ourselves. We don't know what it's like to change ourselves. We have no idea. So in many ways, you're going to start your life in attachment. But how that would look in a healthy, I'm not going to use the word perfect, it's not real, but in a healthy upbringing, you're going to have nurturers, you're going to have caregivers who are also going to give you these tools of non-codependency, non-attachment, but healthy connection. Well, guess what? Most of us, I dare to say pretty much all of us listening to this, maybe not, but if you're here with me, pretty much you have a fear of abandonment. You have some past traumas, which in my opinion, don't quote me on this, but I think everybody has some levels of trauma. I have not met anybody with money, with fame, who has not had some form of trauma. So I dare to say all of us have had trauma. It's just, how is it processed? Are you given the tools to healthily learn that early on? And quite frankly, you're only going to be as healthy as the people who raised you. I mean, how else would you know? The reason you're here, the reason you're somewhere else, the reason you're doing self-help is because people didn't show you this. You didn't have a healthy model of a relationship. How the hell could you? Right? And then you're taught, well, you know what? And then if you put in certain levels of religion and oh, this is what you have to do. And if you're married, you must stay forever and make it work. Sometimes that's not going to work. But that's not what you were told. So if you feel, and this is a big one, and I see it a lot in my practice, in some way, you're somehow a failure if you get out of a relationship that isn't working. What the hell is that coming from? You're not failing anyone because you got into a relationship, let's call it a marriage, whatever. You're not a failure because it's not working. You're not a failure because it's time to come out of that. Don't listen to the masses. Don't put that in your head like you heard growing up in nursery rhymes or whatever, Disney movies early on. You're not meant to always have somebody till forever and ever and ever. It's a great idea. It's a great concept, but people grow. They grow apart. They grow distant, and sometimes they grow closer. During COVID, true story here. During COVID, I had clients, I have clients who've been with me for years who before COVID were like, man, we are getting along. This marriage is amazing. This is great. COVID hit and they're like, oh my God, this is not the marriage for me. We've just been busy. We've had things with the kids, all of this stuff. Well, when you had to pause your brakes, you're like, oh God, this isn't who I want to be with. The other side of that also happened. Oh, I can't wait to get out of this marriage. It sucks. I'm so tired of this. COVID happened. Now you have nothing to do but talk to each other. You would think, okay, that sucks. Well, kinda, but it also opened up a high level of communication because you weren't distracted by running here and running there. So some of those couples who were definitely ready to get, uncoupled and get divorced and do all of those things actually are living their best life right now. Of course, nothing's perfect. So I'm just saying this to you because don't just think because you have a relationship that it's supposed to be forever and ever. In theory, that's amazing. But there's a study by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, and it shows that insecurity makes people prone to toxic relationships, which I think is a fair statement. If you are insecure, you're going to grapple. Why do I keep saying that? Grab on and cling on to anything that remotely looks like it's giving you attention. This is why very often, almost always, in insecurity, you are going to have those relationships that you people please around, that you get gaslit in, and then you fall in love with this idea of like, oh, but they do love me. Or you find those people who are going to tell you, hey, you know what? You're nothing without me. You're so crazy. Nobody wants you. God, you're a lot. You're a lot. Well, guess what? Your insecure self is going to be like, you're right. I am. Well, you know what? I'm a lot. Be a lot. But that doesn't mean diminish your a lot because of somebody else. And that's really, really important. Now, going back to what I said about evolutionary, you have to remember that in ancestral times, survival, you had to survive. Social bonds, you had to survive on social bonds. Now, being alone did mean vulnerable, but yet you still had to be alone. So think about that time where you needed social bonds, because it's not like they had social media or telephones. You needed a social bond to kind of understand and strategize. And if you were out in the middle of pterodactyl world by yourself, you didn't have a lot of protection. However, you needed to be on your own at times. So that's where that confliction goes inside of your head. And so that gives you those deep-seated roots that are ancestrally given to us by our DNA, right? By our DNA and our lineage. Now, there's also neurological evidence. This goes into a lot of it. We already know about attachment. We already know about everything. But in a 2010 study in Psychological Science, it found that social rejection activates the same as physical pain, which is why people avoid being lonely. So let's go through that. I try not to stay too much in science. It's great. I love it. I studied it. But sometimes it can be a lot. So I want to take what I just said and kind of break it down into kind of lay terms, because that's how I work. So let's go through that again. They found that a social rejection, I want to go with this for a minute, because just because you're not included in something doesn't mean you're rejected. This is where the distortion comes, right here. A social rejection is how you see it. Just because you're not included doesn't mean you're rejected. That doesn't mean that that's not how you feel. Oh, your friends went out. I've said this to you before. I've used this example because it's a real example for people around me. If you have a group of friends and you ask them to come over, or you ask one of them to come over and they say that they're busy, they don't give you more info because they don't have to. And later on you're on Snapchat or you're on Instagram and you see people and they're out in a group that you're not included in. So in your mind, you go, they said that they're busy. Well, that is busy. You're just upset that it isn't the busy with you. So in your mind, you're being rejected. But in reality, you know what? Maybe it's not a good fit that night. Maybe it's not a good fit at all. But because of that, it's no different in some psychology, right? It's no different than if I walk up and I just punch you in the face. Punch you in the face. Boom. It hurts. Well, that's where that heartbreak comes from. That's where all of these things happen. So if you go into that and you're afraid of being alone, you're upset about this whole dynamic of these people being out. It's not about you, It goes into feeling rejected because you're not good within yourself. That's why that happens in insecurity, even though there's a neurological base to it. And you got to remember, it's not kindergarten. Everybody doesn't need a cupcake. But that doesn't mean that the people who don't have a cupcake aren't good. And that's the problem. That's the problem. Your fear of being alone somehow means if I'm alone, if I'm not, and I see this all the time, if I'm not married by a certain age, by the way, you don't have to be married. If I don't have kids, by the way, you don't have to have kids. If I'm not married, if I don't have kids, if I don't have the 2.5 kids and a white picket fence and the dog, if I don't have this and I'm alone, somehow I'm the pariah. Well, you know what? There's some truth to that in the 50s. We're not in the 50s. We're in 2025 right now as I'm recording this. Yes, you were you were expected to have a relationship. You were expected to get married and have the kids. People got married at like 15. Like you and I look at that now and be like, holy hell, life expectancy was shorter, but it doesn't matter. Back in the day, people had kids and farms of kids because that's what you did. The older kids took care of the younger kids. This is what happened. This was a system. So if you were a single person, number one, ew, what's wrong with you? By the way, nothing. And you're not following this idea of what is supposed to be in society. And some of that is what you got going on now anyway. So you'd rather stay in a relationship for the sake of the image of, look at us, we have a relationship. But you're miserable as hell and you're on the other side of the computer from me. And you don't know what to do because you don't know who you are. But you know what? You're not alone. But you are alone. But you are alone. Just because people are breathing oxygen in your space, just because someone is related to you, just because someone is an adult child, just because these things are happening, doesn't mean that you're not alone. Well, I guess in theory, you're not alone because you have a physical body there. Let me say lonely. You're right. You're right. You're around those people. You're not alone. However, you're lonely, so you might as well not be with them at all. Again, just because people are breathing oxygen doesn't necessarily mean anything. And believe it or not, there's a fear of love. There's a fear of not having it. And that's how we get trapped, right? There's this common myth. Oh my God, this has been a rhetoric that was given to you since the beginning of time. I can't be happy alone. I can't be happy alone. I can't. No, happiness is an inside job. I've told you this and you'll hear it a million times from anybody you listen to. You cannot find happiness in other people. You cannot find happiness in money. Now listen, I'm not saying you can't rent a little happiness with money. And I'm not telling you that having money doesn't make some things easier for you. But I can also promise you, I have clients who have gajillions of money, and there's a reason they're on the other side of the computer with me, because they feel alone, they feel isolated, and they're stuck in their mind in relationships because they're supposed to have them. What if they're alone? Yes, be alone. And this is where you got to ask yourself, what is it that I'm afraid of by being by myself? What is it? Now, we can keep honest about money. Yeah, is it easier to have a 2-family household? You damn straight. But is it worth having that at the risk of losing who you are or never discovering yourself? I mean, the reality in life is we live in a world that takes money, and unfortunately it takes a lot of freaking money. And it's a lot easier if you have 2 people contributing to the bills. Absolutely valid. But are you willing to do that at the sake of being miserable? And sometimes, you know what? Keeping it real, sometimes the answer to that question is yes for a temporary. Sometimes it is. Sometimes like, oh my God, I need it. But the problem comes when you don't know that that's what it's for. And preferably, I would prefer you not do that at all. But I'd also be like remiss if I didn't say sometimes you're with people for money because you can't do it on your own. The problem comes when you give into that. Well, I can't be by myself. This is how it's going to be forever. That's not true. There are resources. I promise you, there are resources for everything you're going through. The problem comes when it seems far-fetched or it seems like you don't know where to start. That's where the problem is, not that it doesn't exist. Happiness is an inside job. No human being has the ability to make you happy if you're not happy with yourself. People can't make you happy. You are the cake. They can be the icing. They can be the decorations. They can be the cherry, whatever you want to call it. They can't be that as the base. And that's why you're here today. That's why you're here. That's why you're on the other side of the computer. That's why you're listening to 67 people. That's why. Because you're seeking the happiness within yourself. But you have, and valid, by the way, but you have to be willing to do the work. You can't commit to one session with anybody. You can't commit to one podcast. You got to stop seeking it. You will get tools from me, Jay, Mel, Lewis, Trent, anybody else that you are seeking. You are looking for a fast fix. It doesn't exist. And I've told you this before. We will all tell you the exact same thing in a different package. But there's only so many ways. And guess what that way is? You. You are that way. You, not the relationships around you. Now, that being said, certain people talk about something more. Jay talks a lot about relationships and what it looks like to be in a healthy relationship. Valid. But in order to be in a healthy relationship, you got to be healthy. So it's always going to come back to you, right? I'm more of a, hey, time for you to take ownership. And like Mel is more like, hey, you can do it. And you need us all. And I will always tell you that you can do it. But I also will not just be the person to say you can do it and let you just sit still. Okay, just because you can do it doesn't mean you're doing the damn thing. And guess what? Doing the damn thing means sometimes releasing relationships, sometimes getting out of things that are very uncomfortable, but you stay in it for the sake of thinking you're supposed to do it. There is a space for everything you hear, but anything you hear is not a fast fix. It's not going to give you the aha light bulb moment if you're not taking action. I could give you I can't, but I could give you the holy grail of life. If you do this, as you take every step, you'll be amazingly happy for the rest of your life. Well, some of those steps aren't just going to be a breeze. It's not blaming your past. It's taking accountability for where you are today. How the hell can you have a healthy relationship if you're not willing to be alone to work on that? That's why you're staying in wrong relationships. And being in a relationship is not always better than being single. That's false. Bad relationships drain your mental and emotional health. Stop staying in toxic relationships. But you know what? If you have that toxic relationship with yourself, and you can, don't judge it, but it's facts, then of course, what else are you going to know? That's what you're seeking. You're seeking this person or these people to give you this wholeness. Because God forbid you're on your own and you got to do it yourself. Well, think about that for a minute, though. The more you give other people that power, the more this happens, the more you have no idea who you are. Just because somebody says, I love you, what the hell is that? Those are words. Now, I tell you I love you, and I'll tell anybody listening to this, I love you because I legitimately love you because I want what's best for you, even if I don't personally know you. When I'm talking on this podcast, I am talking directly to you. To you. If you're like, oh, it seems like it's about me. It is. Because I see you. I see you even if I don't visually see you. Because I was you. I was you. I was the person who felt unseen. I was the person who felt invisible. I was the person who felt, why in God's green earth am I here if I don't have anybody around me? I was you. That's why I'm here. But I'm here to also let you know it's so pretty on the other side. But the only way for it to stay pretty, right? You got to always cut the grass. You got to water the lawn. You got to replant the flowers. You don't set it and forget it. I mean, you can, but you always got to go back and kind of rehash that. There's a role of self-worth. People who tie their value to be chosen by someone struggles to walk away. You struggle to walk away. So you struggle to walk away because somehow or another, your self-worth is determined by someone telling you that you're lovable. But they can't tell you that if they're not loving themselves. And they're only going to tell you you're lovable sometimes, not everyone, if you're serving their purpose. And I don't mean like, hey, if something doesn't serve your best and highest good, let go. That means if someone's not promoting your growth. It's the same exact thing in love. If a relationship is not promoting your growth, it is not a great relationship. Now, the caveat with that is every day ain't going to be a walk in the park, right? Sometimes I look and go, damn, Paul is annoying me, but I don't look good in an orange jumpsuit. So I'm going to have to let him exist right now because you live in a house with people, you live in a surrounding with people. But I'll tell you this, he promotes my growth no matter what I do. He promotes my growth. I promote his autonomy in the summer. When the weather's good, he is a golfer and he will golf 90% of the summer. And I want you to live your best life. But that doesn't mean that we have some perfect life. That doesn't mean that I don't get on his nerves. I'm a lot. I am a lot. And I'm okay with being a lot. And he knew I was a lot. I'm not going to change that. I'm not going to dim it down. But if one of us felt as though it was really deal breaker, we just wouldn't be in it. And if that meant walking alone for a while, then sometimes that's what it takes. So just remember, relationships aren't supposed to be good all the time. But it's the weathering of the storm is going to depend on where the person is supporting you on your growth journey. And that's going to be something that only you can evaluate. Then, of course, you have the comfort of the familiar, like I was saying to you before. Your brain, how your brain is wired, how my brain is wired, we don't want a lot of risk, right? Our brain is wired and it says, you know what? I don't want pain, but I don't like the uncertainty. So you know what? I'm just going to stay here because it's unfortunate that it's chaotic, but I know how to exist here. And my God, was that not my specialty in life? I needed chaos. I looked for chaos. I looked for toxic. That's right. I didn't realize that that's what I was doing. I needed the dopamine. I needed the excitement, which I'm going to talk to you about in March. I'm doing another dopamine one because it's like, I feel like it's really needed again, especially in the world we live in today. But you get familiar. So heaven forbid you go, okay, well, what if I'm going to leave. I'm going to walk away from people and I'm going to go on an island and I'm going to get a volleyball and I'm going to name it Wilson and we're going to sit here and we're going to hang out together. Yeah. Well, but then what? Well, then what? Well, I don't know. Why do you always need a directional path? Well, if I get out of this relationship, will I find another? Who cares if you do or don't? See, that's the problem. And know this. Stop seeking relationships. Stop seeking friendships. You can't do that until you're good. Or at least, listen, you're not ever going to be perfect. Your goal in life is to aim for 80%. That's your goal. Sometimes you're going to kill it. Sometimes you're not. And that's okay. The average here. You want to connect to you because then you're able to start doing things. In turn, you will meet people not pushing it and not trying to, that will connect deeper to you. Okay? Just because you want your person or your friend or your mom or your spouse to be that person, they might not be. You got to accept that. I don't care how you want it to be. I don't care how you think it should be. Are you going to show up for yourself? Because hello, no one else is going to come and show up for you. And they shouldn't. That's right. They shouldn't, because you're looking for them to do that. Now, that being said, you do want someone to promote you. You do want someone to show you that you deserve things, but you don't want to need it. That's the difference. You want to build and you want to build together, but separately. And this is anything. This isn't just love. This is friendship or anything else. You want to build together, but in order to build together, you must build separately. And it doesn't always have to be included with other people. And sometimes that means you're going to have to walk alone. And you got to remember that you ignore red flags. These flags could be waving all over the place. Flags are jumping out in front of you like we're at a beach. And you're like, oh, look at the pretty flags. You're like, hey, that's red flags. No, look at them. They're waving so pretty. Because in your mind, in your attachment, you want something so bad that you're willing to take it and try to make it, form it into something. But here you are, you're ignoring it. And then you're choosing based on availability. Well, I'm getting older. There's not a lot of single people in the world. Well, they're somebody. Oh, I could tolerate them. It's not too bad. So they're available. Let's just go with it. No. I don't know how many times to tell you that. No. It's just because somebody's available doesn't mean you have to glom onto them. You're not seeing if you're compatible. But you're in such a desperate space to be with someone, you're willing to drop your core values. You're willing to do all of these things. And guess what? Nobody's going to check every box. No one is going to check every box. And that's why you have to go back to your core values and your non-negotiables. Because if you don't know them, you're just going to grab onto anybody. Yeah, if you're compatible, who cares? They're breathing oxygen. They're kind of cute. Things are okay in the sack. I mean, you don't really like how they chew. You don't really like, this, that, and the third. Some of that's you. But I promise you, you are missing red flags and people's green flags. Sometimes you look and go, You know what's interesting about relationships? Sometimes, and I can speak for myself for sure, especially growing up in a chaotic place. If something was calm or seemed good or healthy, I looked at it as boring. I was like, oh God, this sucks. This is so boring. Oh, they're so boring. They just want to stay in the house. The hell's wrong with them? Well, it wasn't that it was boring. Some of it was, right? You got it. Again, I'm an active person. I require active people around me. So yeah, that might not work for me. However, sometimes safety is what you're seeking, even if it's chaotic. But if you have a relationship that's stable, you're not pitter patter every time you see them, that's good. Your nervous system's like, the hell is this? What? You want a healthy relationship, but you're not willing to allow yourself to breathe and be okay with being loved. You're looking to be loved, but then you don't know how to be loved because it's not being loved by the way your attachment style is. But that's not a true statement. I know some of you are listening to this right now, and I'm going to call you out, okay? There could be 100 amazing available people to you. I mean, they are checking boxes. They are hot. They're kind, all these things. They are killing the game. 99 of these people. Then you have this one person who's a little chaotic, because guess what? We're all chaotic. But let's say, big red flags. All these green flags are popping around. You're like, yeah, God, they're boring. You're going to go find that red flag and you're going to go directly there, because growing up as a girl, you want the bad boy. You want the person who's a little unavailable. You want the person who's manly or womanly or whatever the case may be, because your body is trained to do that. You're used to chaos. So heaven forbid you find a relationship that's connected, that just because you're not ready to jump somebody's bones when they walk in, that's not love. Love isn't those things. Love is, I feel safe. Love is, I don't need to have A, B, C, and D. We're good. I feel peaceful. I feel peaceful-ish. I feel calm. I feel seen, but I don't feel like you need to chase me around the house. That's healthy. You just look at it as neglect. That's not neglect. You don't want, and I remember doing this as a person who's gone through trauma, and I'm sure some of you have. If someone wasn't jealous, it was almost like, oh, you don't care? Oh, you don't care? I'm going to go out with these people. But wait a minute, you don't want to be hawked, right? You don't want somebody to get down your throat and be like, what you doing, where you going, who you seeing? But yet if they didn't do that, somehow they don't love you. Trauma. It's a trauma response right there. If you feel someone needs to, or if you feel you need to be the jealous one and you need to do that to show love, that's not love. Nothing about that is love. So then you have to say to yourself, why do you need them to be so reactive in order to let them see that they love you? because then you're just going to constantly adapt to their needs. Constantly adapting to someone's needs will always keep you in the wrong relationship, always 100% of the times. And in 2018, there was a journal in interpersonal violence that study that found fear of loneliness, okay, we were talking about earlier, is a significant predictor of staying in abusive relationships. I mean, that's psychology. It's not blaming. It's just that's why. If you're like, why do I do this? If there's literally, it was a study in 2018 in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence. So this is studied. And it says your fear of loneliness, which we understand, is a significant predictor of staying in abusive relationships. And this doesn't have to just be, physical relationships. A lot of that is also going to be personal relationships. And it could be not just physical, it can be mental, it can be emotional, it could be any of those things. Because abuse victims, and this is just how this works as a person who's gone through a certain levels of abuse, believe that they will have nothing without the relationship. Yep, nothing without relationship. So that forces the cycle of dependency. That's why. It's so easy when people haven't gone through something, and say, well, why didn't they come forward sooner? Why didn't they get out sooner? Because number one, a lot of times they feel their safety of life, number one. But number two, it's this, I'll have nothing without that person. You've been conditioned to believe that, and you can't show up for yourself right now. So it seems like you must have these people in your life. There are resources. I promise you, I have some. If you need it, go right to my website, get on the calendar, and let's work through some of the things that you're going through. Because no human being on this planet listening to this podcast deserves to be in an abusive relationship. That does not mean, side note, that you're not going to have disagreements. That does not mean that that person isn't going to agree with everything you do. That's not abuse. It's the abuse, and you know where I'm coming with it. Now, serial monogamy, I know some of you do this too, jumping from one relationship to another to avoid yourself. So here you are, you're like, okay, I'm in this relationship. God, I need to find out myself. Ooh, what the hell is happening here? I'm going to go jump in this relationship. So you go from relationship to relationship, not because you're looking to just date multiple people. By the way, that's perfectly fine. It's because you keep looking for that one thing. This person's going to fill that void. This person's going to show up. This person's going to do this. No. Stop avoiding your damn self. Stop doing that. So to break free from that, you got to identify and challenge your core beliefs about loneliness. Challenge that. This is how you break free from that. Challenge it. What is your identity tell you? What are you identifying? And what are you challenging, or what do you need to challenge about your belief of loneliness? Journaling. Journal about your 5 journals. Your girl has the 5 journals. Journal about your feelings of being alone. What is it that you associate being alone with? Do you associate it with being a loser? Do you associate it with not being lovable? Do you associate it with that's a big one, not being lovable. Just because somebody's not with you don't mean you're not lovable. It just means you're not compatible. Okay. Would I encourage a friend to stay? Journal. Ask yourself that question. Now, I don't mean you go jumping into other people's business like, get out, get out, get out. I'm saying if a person came to you and said, I feel unfulfilled, or you just see this and they're asking without, unsolicited advice, and what are you going to say? Well, you know what? You don't want to be alone, so make sure you stay. Is that what you're going to say? Because that's a whole other issue. If someone says, I just can't find myself, I don't feel good, I feel sad, I feel lonely, are you going to tell them, well, you don't want to be by yourself, so stay here? Then why the hell are you giving yourself that rhetoric? Why? You got to reframe that. I need a relationship to be, this is how you say to yourself, I need a relationship to be happy. Number one, that's complete and utter bullshit. Versus I deserve a healthy relationship even if I want to separate from it. That's right. You deserve a healthy relationship, but guess what? At some point, you may need to separate from the idea of a healthy relationship because you're trying to make it a healthy relationship. I need to distance from it. So this is where you say, I deserve a healthy relationship, but this is the healthy relationship I deserve. No, You deserve to separate from that idea of thinking that every relationship is a healthy relationship. Separate from that idea. But I deserve a healthy relationship, period. So in order to define a healthy relationship, what does that mean? And then ask yourself, so we're going to go underneath another layer, ask yourself, am I rooting healthy in attachment? Am I saying that this is healthy? What does healthy look like? And it's not happy, it's not peaceful, it's not all of those things, because those are describer words. Happy is not a general term for everybody. Your happy and my happy is different. What I require in a relationship, you might not. I don't want to be with somebody 24/7 because, ew, I want to be able to travel. I want to be able to do that. You may decide traveling by myself may not be my jam. Cool. But what is it? Is it I need to be with this person 24/7? That ain't it. So disconnect from the idea of I deserve a healthy relationship and then this is going to be healthy. That's not true. Disconnect from that being everybody. You do deserve a healthy relationship. That's a guarantee. But are you willing to walk the path alone to find that? Because that's the biggest one. You got to practice being alone without distractions. Oh my God, yes. Reframe loneliness with freedom and engage in hobbies. Do something by your damn self. Do it alone. Listen, I tell every one of my clients, Saturday night, 8 p.m., want you out at a restaurant eating by yourself one time. But no, not but. Oh, you're worried about what other people think. Oh my God, she's so by herself. Well, guess what? Some of those people who are sitting there judging you aren't even happy being in the relationship that they're in. Just because they're sitting across from somebody eating doesn't mean that they're happy. You're sitting there where you don't have to share your bread. You don't have to share your dessert. And a lot of times you only need to have short-term kind of conversations. You can sit there by your damn self with a book, have a glass of wine, chill. If you can't date yourself, if you can't take yourself on dates, then you're always going to be seeking somebody else. Always. Set your relationship standards. What's your personal values? What is your deal breakers? Do your meditation. Do your exposure of being alone for a while, going for walks, taking little mini trips if it's in your budget. You got to develop your emotional independence. Stop outsourcing your self-worth to other people. Stop doing that. You build relationships elsewhere. You start a crochet. I always say that. You start a crochet or a pickleball. Well, guess what? Go hang out with other people and do that. That's connection. That's connection. Because your fear of being alone is deeply ingrained in you, but it can be rewired. But do you want to? I know you don't like it, but are you willing to walk the path? Are you willing to show up for yourself? Are you willing to do it when you're not inspired? Because you might get off this podcast and be like, fuck yeah, I'm ready to do it. Okay, cool. I love that for you. But are you going to feel the same way tomorrow? Are you going to feel the same way 6 months from now? Hopefully you're done by then. That's what you have to ask yourself. Stop looking for that immediate and think that you're going to take action and everything's going to be good. Staying in wrong relationships cost way more than temporary loneliness. I promise you that. I promise you that. I can guarantee it 100% without a shadow of doubt in my mind. But that's why you're staying. Your fear of being alone. So ask yourself this question right now before we jump over on Patreon. Ask yourself this question. What am I really afraid of? Is it the security? Is it not having the 2 incomes? Is it not having kids? Well, why are you hitching your wagon to that to be happy? See, your fear of being alone isn't just sitting in the same 4 walls by yourself. No. It's always deeper than that. Is it a combination of things? Are you glomming on out of survival? Are you thinking you need that just out of avoidance for somebody else to talk to you? See, there's a deeper reason than just breathing oxygen by yourself. I promise you that. So when you get to the deeper roots, then you can dismantle relationships that aren't healthy for you. But you got to be willing to see that. You got to be willing to say, maybe this isn't the relationship for me and maybe I do need to be alone. It doesn't have to suck. You can reframe that as freedom. But are you willing to do that? Only you can answer that question. Are you willing to get out of relationships even if the spouse's parents love you? Are you willing to get out of relationships even if children are involved? And I'm telling you right now, never stay in a relationship because of children. Those same children grow up and they're on the other side of my computer and you think you're doing them a solid favor and you are not. You are not. That I guarantee you. That I can guarantee you. So when you're staying, say, why am I staying? Listen, might be financial. Well, you know what? Let's work through that. Maybe it's a temporary thing that you do have to stay, but you don't have to stay forever. So that's my wrap on relationships, why you're staying in relationships that are wrong for you, and you don't have to, and you deserve a healthy relationship.